This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, Andy Steele. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. John O'Malley is back as the guest tonight, and tonight we have a pretty lively discussion about America in the shadow of the 9/11 lie, as we have other issues come up, things that the public is very concerned about. How much can we trust our media and our government, given that they've lied about one of the most important events in most of our lifetimes? So we talk about that tonight, and it's a pretty long interview once again, so I'm going to be playing that for you in just a few moments. Before I do play tonight's interview, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We'll do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. John O'Malley is a former government worker. He worked at the Pentagon and other agencies. He's also a volunteer with AE 9/11 Truth on its congressional outreach team. John, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you.
So, what have you been up to since the last time that we spoke? Obviously, I think it was maybe in February, if my memory serves me right, that we had you on to discuss just the controlled demolition evidence from your own perspective as a former person who had worked at the Pentagon. And you were on also to talk about Jim McDermott's great response when he was on C-SPAN's Washington Journal. He was asked about Building 7 and said the questions have merit. So this is your third time on the show. What have you been up to?
Well, I'm continuing to be involved in 9/11 Truth and also trying to figure out what is going on in the world, because one of the lessons of 9/11 Truth, or the whole 9/11 thing, is that we do not have a free press. We have a controlled press that must be controlled by some organization, because it would take an organization to control all of the many news outlets that they obviously control. And this organization is obviously a secret organization. Now, this is a very different picture of the America that I thought I used to be living in. I used to think we had a free press and that we knew what was going on because we could depend on the honesty of the people in the press and the media to tell us what is going on. But that obviously is not the case. If we had a free press, we would know the details to three questions. One is, who brought down Building 7? Two is, how did they bring it down? And three is, why did they bring it down? And we don't know the answers to any of those questions in detail. So if they would lie to us about something like 9/11, what else are they lying to us about? So I'm just one of a large number of Americans who are trying to figure out what is going on. And we listen and consume now news from, I guess, what you would call the alternative media. People like yourself, people like Alex Jones, Hagman and Hagman, etc., Catherine Austin Fitz. And we don't know necessarily that they are right. The other thing that we are doing is we are trying to alert other Americans of what we now know, that we are being lied to, and that we don't know what we are being lied to, and that we are not living in the country that we thought we were living in. So I joined architects and engineers, and I try to do for them whatever I can, and I try to follow things like the high-rise safety initiative, which I think that's a really neat thing that they are doing, because it puts the enemy in a reactive mode. It keeps the enemy, in a sense, off balance. It puts people like Mayor de Blasio in a position where they have to react. And Mayor de Blasio and the people on the New York City Council, when they do things to try to stifle this kind of effort, what they do is they self-identify themselves as to who they are and what they are. And as more and more people are waking up to what's going on in this country now, that creates problems for people like Mayor de Blasio. People in New York City are not exactly a bunch of shrinking violets. And if you are a political office holder, you have to live in the world. You have to go to ribbon-cutting ceremonies. You have to go to restaurants. You have to meet people. And as more and more people are waking up to this, I'm sure that he continually gets asked questions about why is he trying to stop the high-rise safety initiative, and what are they trying to hide? So I think that the people that are pursuing this high-rise safety initiative are doing a great thing.
Yeah, now just to give an update to our audience, and I haven't had time to talk about this with the audience yet, so I'm going to take some time right now. Now, the high-rise safety initiative did finish up. The court did rule against it, and they're not going to appeal it. Legal issues involved with it. One of them was that, and I'm just reading verbatim from the write-up off of their own page. It says, proposed charter amendments must be substantially related to an existing provision of the city charter. They must include their own revenue source if they cost money to implement, and they must not be merely advisory. Beyond that, they must be consistent with all other state and federal laws. So there's a hang-up with the money issue, but it just amazes me that ordinary people even have to rabble-rouse and jump through these hoops to make something like an investigation into Building 7 happen. And I said it last week. People like us, people in 9/11 Truth, the rules do not apply. The normal rules do not apply. We have to jump through more hoops than any other cause, because this is one that the establishment doesn't want to come forward for whatever reason. And I share that same awe with you. It's kind of a diluted awe now, because I've been doing this since 2006, looking into this issue, and I kind of come to expect it. There's something going on here, and whether or not it's people following orders and cogs locking and turning and wheels turning like a machine, or whether it's just people afraid to be the one who stands out, I don't know. But this is what we're up against. Nobody in our establishment in any real position of power wants this issue to come forward, because a lot has been built on the official lie. People have built their sandcastles on this myth that fire brought down those 3 buildings. And 9/11 Truth, the reality of what happened on that day, physics and common sense, is a giant ocean wave that'll knock their sandcastles down. Now, it won't hurt America. It won't hurt ordinary Americans. It would actually make our country a lot better. But for these people who consolidate power, who built a lot of their empire off the official lie, it is a threat. So this is just the reality of what we are facing. And I want to get your opinion, John, because you brought this up. We know this. We know what happened on 9/11. We know what happened to the buildings and that it's being covered up. We know that the media lies. I've had people on like 3 weeks in a row talking about the media. I had somebody who was involved in Operation Mockingbird, the CIA's controlling of the media, to talk about his little role in it. So we know this happens. So how do we, when new things come up, things that we may not be sure about, like this whole Ebola panic that's going on right now, how do we know when it's a legitimate story? How do we know when something is a real threat being hyped by the media, or if the media is just trying to sell us a new agenda beyond what we can prove by looking in the alternative media? Where are we? What are we left with as a public, trying to discern what's true and what's false?
Well, I think we have to recognize that there is some kind of organization, and it obviously is a secret organization. It's also a criminal organization. And these people have both advantages and disadvantages. Their advantages, their main advantage is they control the media. They control the mainstream news and the media. They also control large corporations. But they also have disadvantages. In terms of their disadvantages, they are outnumbered astronomically. Another of their disadvantages is that they are losing control of the media because the Internet is a game changer. So we need to be worried about any attempt that they will launch to try to control the Internet in America, just like they control it in China. So in terms of, how do we make sense of, what is really going on in the world, I would say for a lot of us, now that we have seen, Building 7 and its implications, a lot of us have looked at other things like the murder of John Kennedy, Oklahoma City, things like that. And whenever you see something that does not look right, that's an indication that you're being lied to. For example, with the John Kennedy murder, the Zapruder film shows that at least one of the bullets was shot from in front of the limousine, which of course is contradictory to the official story. Another thing would be any time they try to hide evidence. For example, they confiscated and then refused to release the videotapes at the Pentagon, also at Oklahoma City. So this, when you see things like this, I think it needs to create a question in your mind. Other things like when the official story is physically impossible. For example, if you look at the bin Laden raid. Now, I actually followed that because I used to work in aerospace, and I was on the program that produced the helicopters that supposedly took part in the raid. Now, in the bin Laden raid, we were told that they brought the body back to the aircraft carrier and then dumped the body in the ocean before the morning. Now, the people who actually, and that they did DNA analysis during that time period. Now, people who actually do the DNA stuff say that at that time, for them to do that DNA analysis in the number of hours that they did it was physically impossible, because when you do DNA analysis, you have a chemical media that runs through another chemical media, and it's very slow. So all of these things now, I don't know. I have questions. Now, a number of years ago, if someone had, questioned things like this, I would have dismissed them because I believed that we could trust our government. But I don't trust the government anymore. So it's hard. Life was easier back when you could watch the news and believe that they were at least reasonably honest. But now, who knows? Are they telling us the truth about Ebola? Are they telling us the truth about ISIS? I mean, can we believe anything anymore? I don't know. It makes life more complicated, to be sure. And that's why the rise of the alternative media and also the internationalization of the media, I think, is a big deal, because now we can we can listen to radio stations overseas. And so I would say you would have to look at, does the official story violate the laws of physics? Is the official story impossible? And does it make sense? But it's very difficult.
Well, what I love about the bin Laden raid is that they won't release the photographs. They'll fight in the courts, the White House will, to not release the photographs or any video or any evidence of bin Laden being dead, but they released the photographs of the other two guys that were killed in the compound, and I have them. They're bloody and they're horrible, but they show that these guys are dead, but they won't show bin Laden. All they release is a videotape of some guy watching bin Laden on TV. He's got different cheekbones and facial hair growth patterns than bin Laden, and then he was identified by a neighbor when this neighbor was being interviewed. Someone who lived near the compound. He says, "No, I know him well. He's my neighbor, Akbar Khan." So, it's again, no liar saying trust us is not proof. It's not evidence that something happened. And the fact that the American people are so quick to swallow a story when it's given to them. I mean, they threw the body in the ocean. All right, I remember that night when it happened, and the ABC News reporter, I think it was ABC News, one of them, when they got that word, and you could see the doubt cross her face, and she said, "Oh, conspiracy theorists will have a time with that one," and that's her doing her patronizing little statement there. But the reason she says that is because it is fishy, it is ridiculous that they just tossed the body in the ocean within hours, and we don't normally get into these topics here, but I've looked into that too. I didn't sleep for 2 weeks when that happened. I was writing articles on my other blog about that. People can look those up. But it's just one lie after another. Of course, beginning with Building 7, the most obvious, the most in your face. I mean, it's an obvious controlled demolition. The scientific evidence proves it, but they continue to lie about that. And so when something new comes up, like this Ebola thing, and I have people writing to me about it. I have a friend that's very concerned about it, family that's very concerned about this, and I'm stuck in the middle. I don't want to be the guy who poo-poos something and says, "Oh, well, this is not a big deal," and then it ends up being some worldwide pandemic like the Stand or something. But at the same time, I don't want to give in to some potential psyop and get into just some overhyped thing to sell vaccines, which it could be too, and so, what do you believe? You just got to go off the information that they give you and I guess follow your own path. I mean, that's kind of an obvious statement, but it's a real sad state of affairs when you cannot trust a single thing that anybody in the media tells you anymore. And it's funny, we're coming up on Halloween. And there's that movie, Night of the Living Dead. And you watch it, and it's about zombies rising up, and you hear the people talking about getting to certain centers, shelters, to the government's blasting, during the movie, the government's blasting out places where there's shelters set up. And what's sad is that in the modern day, if some insane situation like that, I know it's not realistic, but if some crazy situation like that happened, I would probably not trust what the government's telling me. I probably wouldn't go to the centers. I probably think they had something to do with it, whether they did or not, because you just can't trust them anymore. And that's the state of affairs here in modern day America. All right, you're either brainwashed and neurotically believing everything that your TV tells you, that the White House tells you, and jumping through every hoop and hysterically losing your mind, or you're completely turned off. You're completely unplugged and either apathetic or just pessimistic about the situation, or you're optimistic, but you just don't trust. You don't trust any authority figure, and maybe you shouldn't, but that's a sad state of affairs that we find ourselves in, and all the more reason why we need to resolve the issue, why we need a full acknowledgement of what happened on September the 11th.
Yeah, well, this is, one problem that could arise from this is that in the future, there could be a serious issue that the government would want to warn us about, and people would not take the government seriously. It's like the boy who cried wolf. And, one of the problems of having a controlled press is that if you're going to have a controlled press, one of the first things you have to do is to make people think that it is a free press, which they've actually done a pretty good job of making people think that it was a free press. But once people figure out that they've been lied to, it's like going through a one-way door. You will never go back. That once we've been lied to about something this profound, from now on, we cannot believe anything. And if you look at the high-rise safety initiative, that has cover-up written all over it, where the mayor of New York and the city council are continuing to try to cover up the murder of 3,000 Americans. And when you participate in a cover-up, you become an accessory to the crime. You can actually go to jail for that. It's called being an accessory after the fact. Now, my hope in terms of the high-rise safety initiative is that these people who are doing it do not give up. Like, one of the worst things that we can do is to do what the enemy wants us to do. They want us to just give up and go away. And I think we need to communicate that we are not going to go away. Now, I don't even know if this thing would have passed, even if it had been on the ballot, because I'm really questioning now how valid our elections are, now that I've kind of been exposed to politics a little bit, especially when I do not see a paper ballot. I know this guy who's he's an election official. He's actually over in Virginia. And he thinks that there's a great deal of vote rigging that goes on. And he thinks it goes on at the high levels. And one of the, I guess what you would call prima facie evidence for vote rigging is when there's no paper ballot. Because if you want to engage in electoral fraud or vote rigging, one of the first things you have to do is to get rid of the paper ballot. Because the paper ballot creates a physical audit trail that people can use for elections. So a lot of people that I know, they do not have faith in the validity of our elections. So even if the high-rise safety initiative were to make it on the ballot, I'm not sure that we could trust the results of the election. Now that sounds really bad, but that is the state of affairs that we find ourselves in. So as more and more people start to figure this stuff out, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but we could be headed for some kind of a crisis. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I don't know, because it depends on the American people, and there seems to be people awakened. I watch C-SPAN's Washington Journal just about every morning, or at least a piece of it before I have to go to work. I watch the open phone segment usually, and I listen to people. And there are some people who are sharp, and you know, for me to consider you sharp, you don't have to necessarily agree with me on every issue, but you got to have some kind of understanding and not just be basing it off of some kind of identity politics. You know, you calling on the Democrat line and Obama's awesome. You calling on the Republican line and Obama's the Antichrist. I mean, you know, so basing your opinions on some kind of foundation of knowledge, you know, that's what I consider at least approaching it somewhat intelligently. And you know, I don't hear a lot of it. I mean, I would say about 10% of the people that call in actually have some kind of grasp of reality. The greater majority of people are basically just defending a side. We are so lost in trying to be part of a team and trying to be part of a winning side in this great phony debate. And I understand that there's issues that Republicans and Democrats disagree about, but they don't seem to be issues that get in the way of the real issues, the real money. Okay, it's almost like this is how it seems to me. It's like you're in school and you want to be class president, and we're going to argue over the colors that we're going to have for prom. We're going to argue over what kind of theme we're going to have for this year's fundraising bake sale. You know, but we can't set school policy. We can't say that we're not going to go to school on Fridays anymore, or that we're not going to have as much homework. That's not really in our hands. And I get that feeling from these politicians, especially when you actually try to confront them on issues. I mean, everybody who listens to this show, of course, remembers the C-SPAN campaign when we call in there and ask them questions about Building 7, and they would just completely either clam up and do that phony outrage thing, or call them conspiracy theorists, or they would just kind of get nervous or pretend they didn't hear the question. I mean, this is sad. These are supposed to be our representatives, and these people don't represent me. I mean, you have to have a backbone in order to represent me. And so I don't know. I don't know if the people have it in them. I know that the people listening to the show do. And many times in history, that's all you need. You just need that fiery minority, and then everybody it's kind of like the Dark Knight Rises. You know, some crazy stuff happens and you got 5 people trying to deal with it, and everybody else is just hiding in their house afraid, and so maybe that doesn't matter, but I don't know. I know it is. I mean, the situation with the voting and the computers is very easy to manipulate, but really it depends on this audience, you know, that fiery minority, and how much they want to work for righting the wrongs of this country. The rewards are great, but it is a lot of work. And so, you know, do we have the ambition for it? It's really up to the listener.
Well, you know, in terms of the differences between the Republicans and the Democrats, I'm one of those people who believe that the people at the top of the Democratic Party and the people at the top of the Republican Party are the same people. And they'll basically playing a game of good cop, bad cop against us. Now, if you look at the world through that hypothesis, all of a sudden, a lot of things that did not make sense before, all of a sudden make sense. For example, in Virginia, in the last gubernatorial election, the Republican Ken Cuccinelli was defeated by the Democratic Terry McAuliffe. And if you look at the behavior of the Republican Party at the top, they pulled the rug out. They pulled the money away from Ken Cuccinelli at the beginning of October. And Ken Cuccinelli lost in a very close race. So if you look at what the Republican Party did, it appears to a lot of people that the people at the top of the Republican Party wanted Terry McAuliffe to win, and they wanted Ken Cuccinelli to lose. So, you know, this business of having loyalty to either of the two political parties is something that a lot of people do not buy anymore, but some people do. So, you know, where that leaves us, you know, one of the reasons to have democracy is is so we can settle our differences through the ballot box. Otherwise, people wind up engaging in violence. So when people no longer trust the political process, that creates a danger of some kind of possible violence, and it makes the country less civilized. So I think it's actually a very dangerous situation.
I find a very interesting issue, and this was actually one of the questions I had planned for you, was about how we compete for the attention of the American public. You know, I had somebody questioning me a week ago about certain issues, and this person knows what I do with 9/11 Truth, but you know, a lot of times people don't seem to like quite kind of get it, or at least get it about me. So they're asking me things about ISIS, and they're asking me when the whole hype about the person who jumped the White House fence came out, and is the Secret Service protecting the president well enough? And you know, when you realize that Building 7, controlled demolition, 9/11 buildings in New York were brought down with explosives, and you deal with the cover-up, and you're doing this cause, you know, issues like that, like the Secret Service protection of the president, kind of take a back burner. And it's one of those things that's like, you know, I don't know and I don't care. I don't really, you know, I'm not rooting for anything to happen to the president, simply because I don't think that would be good for the country and for the Constitution if it did. But at the same time, I'm not really concerned about it. It's not, I guess I have the apathy towards issues like that. I don't really think of the president as being anything other than a paid salesman for the people that put him there, and would probably put in somebody from another party the next election comes around, if they thought the American people would respond better to the message from that individual. So, you know, people don't seem to get it. They get distracted with every new crisis that comes up, and the way that the media just feeds the frenzy, makes a big giant panic out of everything. I mean, I remember the swine flu back in 2009, I think it was, when they had everyone thinking that this was going to be some worldwide pandemic, that we were facing the next great black plague, or like the plague that wiped out 96% of the Native Americans in the 1600s. They got everyone all scared. And I mean, I'm not saying the swine flu isn't bad. I knew somebody that had it back in the 70s, but it's always been around. And so, you know, use common sense and all of that, but it's not something to get into a hysterical panic over. And they do this, they keep people distracted, and so they can't look back at this real issue, this very real issue of 9/11 Building 7. They look at it as old news, as something that's not important, because, oh my God, the house is on fire right now. We have Ebola, we have ISIS, we have this, we have that. And, you know, I don't know how we compete for the attention of the American public. Even congressmen, when we questioned him, I think it was Sean Duffy, he said, well, this isn't on Congress' agenda right now, almost acting like this is like some kind of frivolous issue, what really happened to those buildings on 9/11. Obviously, it's not. Like, people died, and we still base our policies on 9/11. But this is the way they think, because they think everything that's being hyped up now, in which they have to respond to politically, it should be the center of their attention, and so do the American people. How do we compete for that?
Well, you know, I think I do it two ways. First way is to use the mass media, use the internet, like, you know, your radio show, use email, like, you know, like, for example, candidate survey. There's this group in the D.C. area. In fact, if any of your listeners live in the D.C. area, the name of the group is DC 9/11 Truth. They have a website, and their website is dc911truth.org. And they sent out a candidate survey where they got the list of all the people running for office, which is about 1,000 in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. And they sent out this survey, And it's a way of using the electronic media to let people know that this is an issue, that people have not forgotten. And the reason that this issue should not be forgotten is because, we live in a world now where, parents watch their children being molested at the airport, where 9/11 is being used to justify NSA and the government recording all of our emails and all of our phone conversations. The government is increasingly becoming more controlling in every detail of our life, and they keep telling us it's for our own good because there's these terrorists out there that are going to attack us. And we are moving into what is some type of a police state where the government of America is starting to resemble something that is close to a totalitarian police state. Now, totalitarian police states do not have a good track record. It did not work out very well in Germany in the 1930s or in the Soviet Union under Stalin. But we are actually on that path. We are on the path where increasingly the government takes more and more of our income, so we have less discretion in terms of our economic ability. Plus, they are controlling increasingly every detail of our life. So this is not a free country. I mean, this is becoming a controlled country. And the people who are controlling a controlled country, if they can get away with premeditated murder of 3,000 Americans, then they are not our friends. We cannot trust them. So I think what we have to do is we have to recognize that we really are in a war of public relations or rhetoric. Rhetoric is the old word for public relations. The art of rhetoric is the art of persuading the crowd. And I think we need to study rhetoric and public relations and then use the tools. If you go on YouTube and type in rhetoric or public relations, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and we can learn from that. And we can use the Internet and the mass media and try to beat them at their own game. So, and I see a lot of success. I see when I see the mainstream media losing readers and losing viewers. To me, that is a metric that we are being successful. When we see people like Alex Jones, where his ratings are going up, when we see increasing distrust of government, when we see things like the New York, the high-rise safety initiative, where they get I think it was over 100,000 people. So I see there is some success. So I'm fairly optimistic. We did not become a free country by being a bunch of cowards. Even though the practice of cowardice could make us bequeath to our children an enslaved nation. But I think that there's a lot of deep intelligence in the American people that is more than many people recognize. One of the things I see with the whole gun control issue that people can recognize when someone else is trying to disarm them and they don't like it. So there's been a lot of pushback. So I'm actually fairly optimistic because the truth is on our side, and I see a lot of young people who can get this. They are more in tune with the alternative media, and so I'm fairly optimistic. Now, one of the things that I've noticed, because I, go around, I talk to a lot of people, and I try to, persuade them, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully. But the one thing I've noticed, the people who seem to get this, the people who seem to understand this, who seem to be smarter in a way, are people who work in the blue-collar area. And I think it's because they seem to have a better knowledge of physical things. For example, if you are a steel worker or an iron worker, or if you're in the construction industry, I think it's easier to understand the implications of the collapse of Building 7 because you have an intuitive feel for structures and how buildings are held together. You have an intuitive feel for practical physics because as a blue-collar person, you do this every day, whereas other people, say you are a personnel officer or an accountant, you may not have that intuitive feel for physical things. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who, they've never even used a screwdriver to screw in a screw, or they've never used a hammer. So they don't have the kind of intuitive feel for everyday practical physics that you get when you actually do physical things, whether it's building a building or taking down a building. So, but the big thing that I think operates in our favor is that this, when people reach this horrifying realization, it's like a one-way door. And every day in America, more and more people are coming to the realization that 9/11 was an inside job or something. I mean, something's not right. So this creates problems for the crooks. I think the crooks are probably getting nervous because they had a big snafu with Building 7, for example, and this now this is conjecture, so I don't know, but this is what a lot of people think. If you look at Building 7 is the main thing that has caused these criminals the most problems, because Building 7 is the one thing they cannot explain away. Now, if you view 9/11 as a military operation, it would appear that there was a snafu regarding Building 7. If Building 7 had been hit by a plane, the truth movement would barely exist. So the plane that did not hit Building 7 is kind of like the dog that did not bark in the Sherlock Holmes story. So if you look around and see, well, what happened to the plane that was supposed to hit Building 7? Because if a plane hit Building 7, then the official story would be believed. Well, that's why people think that the plane that went, or whatever it was, that went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, may have been originally headed towards Building 7. And if you look at the official story of Shanksville, the official story is contradicted by the official evidence, because the official story is that the plane crashed into the ground. But the debris is spread over, 6 or 8 miles, which means that the plane did not crash into the ground. It disintegrated or broke up at a higher altitude. So we know something's wrong, but we don't know what the truth is. And everything I've just said really is in the category of speculation and conjecture. And the fact that we would be put in the position of having to speculate about something like this just shows us how uninformed we are. I mean, we know we've been lied to, but we don't know what the truth is. So that's kind of my take on that. What do you think?
Well, it's obviously a controlled demolition. Why they controlled demoed it, I don't know. I've heard people say that fourth plane was meant for Building 7, and I mean, it sounds good. Other people say that maybe it was supposed to go into the Congress. It's all speculation because we don't know. But the fact is it was controlled demolition. Now, I think that the people, I mean, obviously, and I've said this before in the show, to pull off something like 9/11, the people who did this had a big set of you-know-what. Because obviously you're bringing down these giant buildings on a bright blue Tuesday morning in front of everybody and then lying to them about what really happened. That's got to take some guts, some evil guts, but guts nonetheless. I don't know. You mentioned something earlier about people, blue-collar people, being more receptive to this, more open to speaking out about things like Building 7. What I've noticed, I'm a blue-collar worker myself. I mean, literally, the shirt I have to wear is blue. But I noticed that, like, in certain types of jobs, you have more freedom to speak openly, and it serves your interests better to speak openly. For instance, you're working in a factory and there's a problem with the product coming down the line. You got to speak out about that, and you got to speak out quick, because if you don't, the quality assurance is going to pick it up, and you're going to have to end up catching up with that. You're going to get behind orders, and your boss is going to be mad at you. And people aren't as worried about hurting your feelings or whatnot when you do screw up in those kinds of fields. People speak more openly and directly with each other, and maybe with even a few curse words mixed in. I know I've done this for my whole adult life. I've also worked in white-collar jobs, too. I've had a lot of jobs, folks. I won't even get into the amount of jobs I've had. And I noticed in certain kinds of white-collar jobs, too, people kind of talk around each other. People try to choose their words very carefully. People, instead of saying, you screwed up, they'll say things like, well, I'm very disappointed in you. I always used to love that when I heard that as a kid. I'm very disappointed in you, Andy. Oh, really? Okay. So you have one set of professional people who it's more advantageous for them to not take on something directly, to kind of work behind the scenes, to try to politely handle stuff and not take on controversy or problems in a direct fashion. And then you have another set of people where you have to be direct, and it's part of the culture to be direct and even rude sometimes. And I think that might play into why people can say, hey, that's an obvious controlled demolition. I don't care. I don't care about free fall or nanothermite or whatever. I'm just using my own two eyes, and that's a controlled demolition. I don't care what you have to say about it. That's what I think. And the other people who will say, well, it's very interesting. I'm a conspiracy theory buff. I love it when people call me a buff, too. It just drives me nuts. I remember that somebody had left that as a comment on an article about 9/11, and somebody else had written, like, did you just call me a buff? How dare you? And they went off on this whole long rant. But I do. I think that it's maybe there's class plays into it, kinds of professions people have, what they're used to, how they're used to handling conflict. And the problem is with a lot of our economy based on not actually producing anything, you have a class of people who have learned to get ahead by avoiding direct controversy.
Well, I agree with you. One thing about the white-collar area is, and I used to be involved in this, if you are doing something that is easily measurable, say you are a steel worker and you are putting up a steel structure, what you're doing is very measurable, that you can put up the structure in so many hours and it doesn't fall down. Whereas in the white-collar area, the measurement of performance is not exact. If you are producing widgets in a factory, the measurement of your performance is a measurement. How many things did you build, or how many things did you make? But in the white-collar area, the measurement of performance is more of an opinion. And people succeed or fail based on whether they are liked. How do they get along? Because the white-collar area is really more of a service area. So, and one of the main problems in the area of human resources these days is the difficulty in measuring the performance of people in the white-collar service areas, because the measurements tend to be opinions rather than measurements. So I think that could be a part of it. And in addition to the fact that people who work in the blue-collar area have a better feel for physics, everyday practical physics, whereas you have people in the white-collar area who, do not even know how to hold a hammer, and where everything is done for them. So I think that you are right, and that's one of the reasons why people in the blue-collar area seem to be smarter, and the people in the white-collar area seem to be not as smart. And I've actually talked about this with other people in the 9/11 Truth area, and we've talked about where the blue-collar people seem to be smarter, and they get this stuff faster.
You hear that, people? Workers of the world unite. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, and I don't know if it's even smarter or not. It's culture. I'll tell a quick story. I did used to work in a factory. I produced breathing apparatuses for a company that doesn't exist anymore. And I did that for years. And that's actually when I started waking up to a lot of these kind of truth issues in a very slow way, because I had a lot of time to stand there and think. But I went from that job, and then I was working as a collection agent for a financial company. I won't say the name. And I only did that for a month. It was a temp job. But I remember part of the job was that I would call people up and I would say, you owe this money, whatever, and then I'm supposed to say in this kind of, sad, sympathetic voice, like, is there anything we can help you out with? What's going on, man? And if they started to tell their troubles, I'm supposed to connect them either with my boss or this girl that worked in the office also, and they hook them up for another loan. And I remember thinking, well, they're already in debt. How are they going to pay back the new loan, right? And so one night, it's New Year's Eve. I'm coming back from another job. I was also working at a video store, and so I was working two jobs at the time. But I stop at this bar to celebrate New Year's Eve, and that girl from the office is there, and we get talking and drinking. And I kind of said this. I said, okay, so they're already in debt, and we're just putting them in more debt so they can never pay it back. And even before I finished saying it, she nods her head almost like, yeah, I've thought about this myself, and I don't understand it either, but I'm making money, and so I've chosen not to think about it anymore. That was basically all conveyed to me in that short conversation, was that stance. And so people are being put into systems that are ultimately toxic, that are not good for our country, but they're making money in the short term, and we've learned to just put short-term interests ahead of what the bigger picture is, the more important picture. Of course, then we had the financial meltdown after that. So, again, we've had this culture where we put short-term ahead of long-term interests. Your short-term interests are to ignore things like 9/11, controlled demolition. Obviously not in your long-term interest, because if you let them get away with that, they're going to do it again, but it's a survival thing. We've learned to be like this. And again, this is something that we have to overcome, a mentality that we have to overcome.
Well, yeah, a lot of people, they just need to get through the day. People with demanding jobs, children, maybe older parents, they have a lot to do, and they don't have a lot of time to spend on the internet, watching the latest YouTube on 9/11 Truth or Building 7. They're kind of concerned with the here and now. And, for them, in terms of their immediate life, things look okay. You know, they have jobs. The stores have, you know, they can get anything they want at the store. They drive nice cars. They live in comfortable houses. You know, outside the sun is shining. It's a beautiful day. You know, things look so good that it's really hard to believe that our country could be in so much trouble. And that really, I think for us to address that, that is where we have to really get into the third leg of Aristotle's three legs on rhetoric. Aristotle had developed, and it's very good, worthwhile reading. I would advise anyone to read it or to look it up on YouTube. We are really involved in a war of rhetoric, and rhetoric is the art of persuading the crowd. And there's three legs. The first is credibility, where, you know, we have to be credible, or we have to be believable. And that can, you know, come from having, you know, letters behind your name like AIA, or, you know, wearing a suit where you look professional, behaving in a way that is professional. And you see this all the time on TV when, you know, like a commercial, they'll have some guy and he's wearing a suit which makes him look smart, and he's sitting at a mahogany desk, and he's, you know, there's a lot of bookshelves in back of him with all kinds of books, and he's, you know, trying to sell you a product. We have to do that. And then, of course, the second leg of Aristotle's three legs is logos, or logical reasoning. In other words, we have to present a case that makes sense. And I think this is probably the easiest, because it's very easy to present the evidence of Building 7 and the Pentagon and all the other things and show that this makes sense, because it's very logical. But the third one, that's the emotional. That's where I think we have to do some more work. And we have to, you know, connect to the emotions of the crowd that we are trying to persuade, and we have to give them a reason why they should join us. And one guy who's done, I think, a good job of this has been David Hooper in his movie The Anatomy of a Deception, in that he is very good at persuading or connecting to people on an emotional level. And we have to, you know, make people realize that if these criminals are not stopped, they are going to ruin the country, and our children are going to be enslaved.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there because we are out of time. John, it's always interesting when you come on the show, and you're a popular guest, so I know you're going to be back. But thank you so much for coming back on 9/11 Freefall. Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of the show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week. Good luck.